I woke up to a sound that did not belong in the quiet mornings of my retirement. No birds, no breeze, just the jagged ripping growl of chainsaws tearing through the dawn. It took me a moment to realize it was not distant construction or city work. This was right outside my bedroom window. I stumbled half awake onto the porch in my pajamas, the summer air cool against my skin. And that is when I saw them, 4 men in neon vests circling my yard like vultures, their saws biting into the thick trunks of the oak trees my wife had loved. Those trees had been here for 40 years, older than some of the neighbors, older than the subdivision itself. Their branches stretched across the yard like guardians, shading the house and the memories. I had built inside them every morning since Sarah died. I sat under those oaks, coffee in hand, listening for the echo of her laughter in the leaves. It was the closest thing I had left to her, and now they were being cut down one by one. I scanned the yard, searching for who had given the order, and then I saw her sitting in the white Escalade parked at the curb windows, down sunglasses perched high like a crown. Constance Peaton, my homeowners association president, the woman who had sold me this house 3 years ago. She was not frowning. She was not regretful. She was smiling, directing the men with a wave of her manicured hand like she was conducting a symphony of destruction. And in that instant, a cold truth ran through me. These were not just trees being lost. This was war, and Constance had no idea what mistake she had just made, because those oaks were not hers to touch. They were on my property, and in cutting them, she had just crossed a line that would cost her everything, but I did not know that yet. All I knew was the sound of chainsaws, and the sight of bark splitting open like bone, and the weight of rage that made it hard to breathe. I shouted over the machines, my voice cracking, "Stop, stop, this is my land." But the crew barely glanced at me. One shrugged helplessly and pointed back toward the woman in the Escalade. She gave me a smile that was all teeth and shadow, and I understood then she thought she was untouchable. 3 years ago, I had thought I found paradise. Garrett Blackwood, 52, newly retired electrical engineer, a man who had given his life to circuits and schematics, now free to live quietly on a corner lot in Millbrook Estates, Ohio, 1.2 acres, wrapped in green, 6 towering oak trees that reached toward heaven like cathedral spires. Sarah and I had dreamed of this place when we were young. We wanted space-light water, and those trees had felt like a gift from God themselves. She had died of cancer 6 months before I bought it. Her absence an ache that filled every room, but under those trees, I could almost hear her again. They were proof she had been right all along, that beautiful things could survive storms. The realtor was Constance Blonde, 48, with that clipped, polished charm that made her seem like she had rehearsed every word. She sold me the house with a smile and a casual mention that she was also HOA president. Nothing serious, she promised, just a formality. "We barely have rules here," I should have recognized the warning. Then, the second warning came at the first community meeting. She ran it like a corporate takeover, PowerPoint slides about property value optimization, community aesthetics, her gavel striking like a hammer when anyone disagreed. I watched her shut down a 70-year-old veteran who wanted to plant a memorial garden for his fallen son. She dismissed him, not in keeping with our vision. Her words cut sharper than any saw. And I noticed then the way her eyes kept flicking to my trees through the window. That calculating glint, like she was measuring them for removal. 6 weeks later, she arrived at my door, dressed in tennis whites, smelling of perfume so strong I could taste it in my throat. "Garrett, honey, we need to talk about your trees." Her heels clicked on my porch like a countdown. She told me several lakefront neighbors had complained about their view being blocked. I looked past her to the artificial lake where 3 homes, each worth nearly $1 million, sat glimmering in the sun. My oaks stood tall between them and the water, and I realized the neighbors did not want shade. They wanted sight lines. I reminded her I bought the house from her herself with those trees already here. She smiled, but her eyes went cold. "Oh, absolutely. But things evolve. Property values, community standards. Surely we can find a solution. That was my first lesson in what I came to call constant speak, where solution meant you lose, and community meant constance over the next. 18 months, she escalated it. Started with little comments during her power walks, overgrowth maintenance. She said always loud enough for the neighbors to hear. Then came official violation notices for mailbox height for grass 1.2 inches. Long for the color of my welcome mat, each fine $50 a day, each appeal in front of her hand-picked board retirees who never made eye contact when they voted against me. It was not about rules, it was about pressure. Comply or pay, but she underestimated me. What she did not know about engineers is that we solve problems and we keep records late nights under my trees. Laptop balanced on my knees, I pulled subdivision plats, zoning laws, deed restrictions, every scrap of evidence I could find if she wanted war. I would fight with paper and patience. Then came the breaking point. She hired an arborist who claimed my healthy trees were dangerous, his report thick with dramatic photographs and warnings of widowmakers ready to fall. But the man was no certified arborist, his license suspended for falsifying reports. He was a fraud, just like the woman who hired him. That was the first time I realized this battle was not about trees, it was about power. Constance had been playing queen of the neighborhood for years, but she had just made the move that would undo her empire. Everyone in that neighborhood thought she was unstoppable, but the truth was, Constance had just cracked her own mask, and I was ready to press on the fracture. 2 weeks after the arborist scheme fell apart, she appeared on my porch again wearing that same predatory smile, a manila folder tucked under her arm thick as a phone book. "Garrett, honey, I have wonderful news." She purred, her perfume clinging in the air like smoke. The newly formed Millbrook Estates Emergency Safety Committee has completed a thorough review of your dangerous trees. My stomach dropped. Emergency Safety Committee. I had never heard of such a thing. "Oh, yes, very official," she said. "Mrs. Henderson, the Johnsons, and myself, we have determined your trees pose an imminent threat." She shoved the folder at me filled with photographs taken during the last ice storm, branches sagging under the weight of frost, twisted at angles that made them look like weapons. The words demanded immediate removal to prevent catastrophic damage. Would have been terrifying if I had not already uncovered the truth. She was lying again. And worse, she thought she was clever enough that no one could stop her. But she had made a mistake. She did not understand that Ohio required certified arborists for such emergency declarations, and her so-called expert was suspended, discredited, a fraud. While she stood smiling in triumph, I was already planning my counterstrike that night. I opened the state licensing database the way some people open scripture. It confirmed everything. The arborist she hired had been banned 3 months ago for falsifying reports. The state file was thick full of scams and fraudulent assessments, but that was not all I knew. Ohio was a one-party consent state, meaning every single recording I had of Constance casually admitting her motives, her obsession with lakefront views, was perfectly legal evidence. The very next morning, I called Inspector Rodriguez, a weathered man who walked my property with sharp eyes and a GPS unit. He muttered curses in Spanish under his breath as he measured soil depth and traced root lines, shaking his head. Finally, he turned to me. "Mr. Blackwood, these are specimen trees, strong, healthy. Someone wasted city resources filing this fraudulent complaint. Could you document that officially?" I asked. He was already writing the complaint, dismissed with prejudice. "And tell your HOA president that if she files another fake emergency report, she could face criminal charges." That was the day I realized I could do more than just defend myself. I could go on the attack. I filed complaints with the licensing board, with the county prosecutor, with the city itself. Every lie she had woven was unraveling faster than she knew. But the discovery that stunned me came when I pulled the original 1987 plat map of Millbrook Estates. One evening, I traced the lines by lamplight and found something incredible. My lot extended 15 feet further lakeward than the survey stakes claimed. It meant that some of The gardens, docks, and patios my neighbors had enjoyed for years were technically on my property. When I showed Mrs. Henderson, she turned pale. "Garrett," she whispered. "Constance told us you were planning to cut the trees for insurance money," she said. "If we did not support her petition, our property values would sink." Her words trembled. Then she leaned closer. "She has done this before. The Williams on Elm Street. She forced them to cut down a maple they loved, told them it was blocking views. They sold their home rather than keep fighting. I sat under the oaks that night listening to the lap of lake water, knowing for certain. Now this was not about trees. This was about a scheme, a systematic manipulation of property boundaries, sight lines, intimidation. Constance was not a president. She was a predator, so. I turned my eyes toward her own property if she cared so much about my land. What about hers? What secrets lay in the soil beneath her mansion, and what I found 3 days later made my hands shake with the weight of it. The land her $1-million house sat upon, according to the developer. Bankruptcy records was never supposed to be hers at all. It was designated as community green space. Her deed traced back to preliminary. Plats that had never been finalized. She had buried the truth with money bribes, cover stories. Her entire estate was built on fraud. And yet she did not slow down. The very morning after I pieced it together, I woke to find 5 violation notices banded. To my front door mailbox color, grass length, "Welcome Matt, non-compliant hose visible, each violation carrying $50 a day," bleeding me dry as though she could starve me into silence. But she had just made another mistake. Those papers were not warnings. They were evidence. Evidence that an HOA with an expired corporate license had been shaking down homeowners illegally for over a year. I marched to the courthouse, demanded the filings, and discovered Millbrook Estates HOA was not even registered. As a corporation anymore, they had lost their status 18 months ago. That meant every fine, every penalty, every rule had no legal standing. It was fraud, plain and simple. The deeper I dug, the darker it became. The HOA bank account was not even under the HOA. It was funneled into her private company, Peaton Properties, LLC. Every dime of dues, every payment for years had gone straight into her own pocket, more than $200,000. I called the state fraud hotline, and when the investigator, on the other end, heard me explain, expired corporations, diverted funds, fraudulent fines, they nearly salivated. Neighbors whispered stories to me in hushed tones. Every week, a new victim emerged. Forced sales at below-market values. Families driven. Out by fines, violations, harassment, and every single one of those sales handled by her company. She was not protecting property values. She was stealing property itself, running a theft ring under the mask of community governance. I looked up from my notes one evening, and through the branches of my oaks, I could see her mansion across the water gleaming under the sunset like a monument to lies. Every dinner party she had hosted, every glass of wine raised on that stolen deck, it was all built on theft, and I knew then I would not stop until it all came crashing down around her. The morning I realized just how far she would go, I found 5 new violation slips stapled to my door as if paper could bleed. A man mailbox shade, unauthorized, welcome mat, wrong color, grass height, a fraction too long, garden hose visible each slip. Carried $50 a day. A slow bleed she hoped would starve me into surrender. I stood on my porch, the scent of Sarah's honeysuckle garden drifting in the air, and I swore I would never bend to her. That afternoon, I walked into the county courthouse. The clerk handed me what should have been a fat file full of corporate filings, but the folder was thin, too thin. Inside, I found the truth. Millbrook Estates HOA had allowed its non-profit corporate status to expire over a year ago, which meant every notice, every fine, every threat was legally worthless. Constance had been running an illegal shakedown for 18 months. But the deeper shock came when I traced the bank account itself. It wasn't registered to the HOA. It was registered to Peaton Properties. Her real estate business, $250,000 of community dues funneled straight into her company. This was not incompetence, it was theft. Neighbors started coming to me quietly. Henderson, with trembling hands, showed me documents she had been overcharged thousands for repairs that never happened. Johnson told me how Constance made him remove a shed, only to have her own landscaping company install an identical one at her property with HOA funds each story added. Weight to the mountain of fraud. Then came the smoking gun. Her own pride, Constance had been documenting her crimes on social media photos of chainsaws tearing through beautiful trees, captions bragging about improving sightlines. She had confessed to the world without even realizing it. I gathered the board members who still had a conscience, Henderson Johnson and one other. We sat in Henderson's living room, the smell of coffee heavy in the air. As I laid out the evidence, their faces moved through. Shock to fury, she has been stealing from us for 2 years. Johnson's voice cracked worse. Henderson whispered, she's been using our money to attack us. That was when Constance struck back. She called a surprise board meeting, dragging her husband Richard. A city councilman into the room as muscle fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Neighbors filed in, sensing something big. Constance stood tall, her voice echoing. Mr. Blackwood continues to defy community standards. I call for immediate emergency tree removal and expedited lien proceedings. I rose with my folder of evidence, my voice steady before any vote. This community needs to know the truth. Millbrook Estates. HOA has been operating illegally for 18 months. Every fine, every penalty, every threat, all of it fraud. The room exploded in shouts, but Constance only smiled, and that smile chilled me. Well, she said, smoothing her blazer, it seems Mr. Blackwood has done his homework, but research cannot protect him from legitimate safety concerns. She pulled out her phone, made a call right there in front of everyone. Yes, this is Constance Peaton. We have that tree emergency tomorrow morning. No, the owner will be traveling. My blood turned to ice. She had been watching my social media. She knew. I was driving to my daughter's graduation. She knew I would be gone 8 hours. Ladies and gentlemen, she announced, emergency tree removal will commence tomorrow, 7 a.m. Her voice dripped with false concern. The room erupted. Henderson shouting about illegality, Johnson demanding permits, but Constance walked out, phone to her ear, already making more calls. That night, I paced my home, unable to breathe, knowing what was coming. I called my daughter, told her I could not make it to her graduation, the first milestone I ever missed in her life, and I hated Constance for forcing that sacrifice, but I could not leave because I knew what would happen at dawn at 5 a.m. I stood at my window camera, ready, the sky gray with coming rain at 6:47. The convoy arrived, 2 pickups, a wood chipper, a sheriff's cruiser, men in hard hats like soldiers preparing for battle chainsaws, growled to life. I ran outside, screaming, stop, these are my trees, my land. The foreman handed me a work order signed by Constance Peaton, Emergency Safety Coordinator, but I recognized the header. It matched the expired documents. It was meaningless. This woman has no legal authority, I shouted, but the sheriff deputy, a stocky man named Martinez, stepped forward. I am here to supervise a legitimate safety operation. City inspector signed off, he said, fumbling with papers. Inspector Rodriguez, I demanded. He looked away. Yes, yesterday. He signed it. But I knew that was a lie. I had spoken to Rodriguez weeks earlier. He had called my trees healthy specimen trees and warned me any emergency claims would be fraudulent. Someone had forged his name or bribed him. As I argued, the saws screamed, steel biting into living wood. My heart slammed in my chest. Stop, stop, but they didn't listen. In 27 minutes. 6 massive oaks that had stood since the 1980s were reduced to chips, even the one where I had carved Sarah's initials, where I proposed, where I scattered some of her ashes, gone. When the crew pushed past the boundary line, cutting 15 feet into land, proven legally, mine deputy Martinez's face went pale. He realized he had just supervised destruction of private property. His radio crackled. His voice shook. Jesus Christ. We may have a problem here. I stood surrounded by stumps, the air thick with sawdust, diesel, and grief. $89,000 worth of trees destroyed in less than an hour, my wife's memorial ripped from the earth. But grief hardened into rage because in her haste, Constance had made a mistake that would end her. She had committed crimes in front of witnesses, trespass, destruction, fraud, conspiracy. As the crew packed up Deputy, Martinez whispered to himself. Sick with dread, the foreman muttered. She just said cut everything, didn't mention property lines. I stared at the wreckage and felt clarity. For the first time, she thought she could erase my past to protect her view. But she had just handed me the evidence to erase her future. By the time my lawyer called, I was still shaking Marcus Bennett, property rights specialist, his voice sharp with energy. Garrett, you won't believe what I found. Her lakefront lot was never legally hers. It was supposed to be community green space. The sun struck her mansion across the water, a gleaming lie, and I knew then this war was only beginning. The morning after the massacre, my yard looked like a battlefield. Sawdust drifting through the air like smoke stumps, standing like gravestones, each one marking a memory gone. Sarah's carved initials vanished beneath the chipper teeth, her laughter silenced in the roar of chainsaws, and yet amid the ruins something burned inside me. Not just grief, but a sharp, unstoppable clarity. Constance had crossed a line so deep there was no going back for either of us. My lawyer Marcus arrived before noon, his briefcase stuffed with documents, his face carrying that hungry gleam of a man who smelled blood in the water. Garrett, he said, you are not just suing for tree damages anymore. We are demanding reversion of illegally privatized property, federal jurisdiction. This case just exploded. He was right. Constance had spent years bullying neighbors, hiding behind rules and fines. But the truth was her castle sat on sand, her mansion built on community green space, stolen with forged deeds and buried filings, and now with her chainsaw stunt, she had given us everything we needed. Marcus laid it out piece by piece. She funneled over $347,000 through her personal accounts. She used HOA funds to repair her own dock. Her driveway, her landscaping, she had run the association like her personal bank account. Henderson called me whispering she overcharged us $8,000 for community repairs. Johnson confessed she made me tear down a shed, then used HOA funds. To build one at her place, the stories piled up, each one another brick in the wall, closing around her. We built a team, a forensic accountant, Lisa Rodriguez, sharp-eyed and relentless. She traced every dollar contracts to companies she secretly owned. Invoices for work never done. Even divorce attorney fees buried in HOA expenses. An environmental lawyer, Janet Morrison, joined. She specialized in tree law, a phrase I had laughed at once until she showed me numbers. 6 mature oaks valued at $89,000 in replacement costs. But more than that, their removal destabilized soil drainage, risking erosion and property damage. Constance had not just cut trees, she had triggered an environmental crime scene. The third attorney was even more terrifying, a RICO specialist who spoke of racketeering like a general mapping a battlefield fraud spanning multiple neighborhoods, multiple victims tied to elected officials. This wasn't just corruption, it was organized crime, while Marcus built the legal war machine. I rallied. The community word of the massacre spread through Millbrook Estates like fire. Henderson Johnson. Others called me daily, each with their own scars. Shed bankrupted families, ruined retirements, forced sales. Each story following the same pattern: manufactured violations, escalating fines, harassment, until people sold cheap. Every sale handled by Constance. The final piece came from Carol Martinez, the sheriff's wife. Her voice trembled on the phone. Mr. Blackwood, my husband came. Homesick after that tree cutting. Constance told him the city had authorized it. But when he checked, there was nothing on record. She handed him $500, called it overtime pay. He thought it was legitimate until he realized she lied. That gave us evidence of bribery of law enforcement, a charge that would rattle every prosecutor from here to Columbus. Marcus plotted our strategy like a military campaign, criminal referrals to the county prosecutor, civil lawsuits in both states. and federal court licensing complaints to strip her of her real estate credentials, everything filed at once, so she had no time to hide her assets or invent excuses, and yet the most satisfying strike was one the community would deliver themselves. Under Ohio law, homeowners could vote to reclaim common land illegally privatized with proof. And now we had it. Imagine the irony. Marcus grinned. She destroyed your trees to protect her lake view, and we are about to take away her entire lakefront. But fate had one more twist. The environmental lawyer discovered the patch where my oaks once stood had been designated as wetland buffer in the original development plans. Removing them had triggered federal jurisdiction under the Clean Water Act. Constance had turned her HOA scam into a federal environmental crime, punishable by hundreds of thousands more in penalties. Within a week, we had built a fortress of evidence, and Constance knew it. I saw the moving truck outside her mansion boxes, carried out furniture wrapped. She tried to list her property for sale, a desperate attempt to flee before the courts froze her assets. But Marcus anticipated it by afternoon. A restraining order was filed. The sheriff served it, papers fluttering, in her hand as her face twisted from arrogance to fear. That night she tried a different attack, flooding the neighborhood Facebook page with claims I was a bitter old man dodging legitimate fines. She posted carefully cropped photos of my yard called me a danger to community standards, but the strategy backfired spectacularly within hours. Henderson posted scans of bogus fines. Johnson uploaded before and after photos of unnecessary repairs. Neighbors piled on. 17 families joined our class. Action lawsuit in just 3 days. Constance flailed like a cornered animal. She tried bribing Inspector Rodriguez, offering him $2,000 to backdate an emergency authorization. What she didn't know was Rodriguez was still furious about. Being dragged into her fraud, he wore a wire. Her voice caught clear, offering cash for falsified government documents. That recording went straight to the FBI, elevating her crimes from state misdemeanors to federal felonies. Meanwhile, she convinced 3 neighbors to sign affidavits claiming my trees had been dangerous, but a little digging revealed each family had just received suspicious tax reductions through her husband's city council connections. Their affidavits were nothing but bribes, disguised as statements, another thread in the web tightening around her. Then she filed a counter-lawsuit accusing me of harassment, of threats of vandalism, demanding $500,000 in damages. But she made the fatal error of including dates. Dates I could disprove with time-stamped phone records with home security footage. She had handed us evidence of perjury. Another felony. Through it all, the community rallied meal trains delivered to my door volunteers, replanting my ruined yard neighbors. Once divided by petty disputes, now united by rage and hope. Carol Martinez organized a petition demanding her removal from the board. 41 of 47 families signed within 48 hours. Federal investigators froze her accounts. The licensing board suspended her credentials, her husband facing ethics charges, his political career disintegrating. The walls closed in from every side, and yet she still believed she could outmaneuver everyone she called an emergency meeting. Her final gamble, and the mistake that would destroy her forever. The community center buzzed like a hornet's nest. That Sunday afternoon, cars lined 3 blocks. Reporters clustered by the doors. Neighbors filled every chair until the walls seemed to breathe with the weight of anger and anticipation. The air smelled of dust and coffee and something sharper, the scent of justice closing in. Constance entered through the side door dressed in a black suit, her face set in that brittle mask of control, her husband Richard trailing beside her, sweating under the fluorescent lights. 3 uneasy board members took their seats, and in the back row I spotted her. The federal agent Sarah Bennett, government notebook, open, pen ready. Federal investigators do not attend HOA meetings unless they are already building a case. Constance struck the gavel, her hand trembling. Ladies and gentlemen, recent events have made clear that our association is no longer viable. I call for an immediate vote to dissolve Millbrook Estates HOA and distribute assets to current homeowners. Her words. were calm, but her eyes darted sharp and desperate, and in that moment I saw her real plan, not escape, but destruction. If the HOA dissolved, the records of her crimes would vanish into bureaucratic smoke. Neighbors erupted. Henderson shouted, "Where is our money?" Johnson demanded an accounting. Constance pushed forward, trying to ram the vote through like a thief sprinting for the door. I stood, my folder of evidence heavy in my hands. Before we dissolve anything, this community deserves to hear the truth. "You're out of order," she snapped, but my voice carried steady. "Actually, I am perfectly in order as a homeowner in good standing. I have the right to present evidence." "Agent." Bennett looked up, interest sparking in her eyes. I spread the papers. Across the table, Constance Peaton has embezzled $347,000 from our community. She has bribed government officials. She lives on property that was never legally hers. She is not dissolving this HOA to help homeowners. She is trying to erase evidence of federal crimes, her face twisted with rage that slander. "I have given years to this community. Then explain why your house sits on land designated as green space." Her mouth opened, closed. A stammer slipped out. "It's a misunderstanding of development plans. A misunderstanding that made you $850,000 richer," I answered. Richard stood his chair, screeching across the tile. "This meeting is over. We are leaving." But before they could flee, Constance broke the mask completely, her voice rising into a scream. "You people don't understand what I have done for you. I improved property values. I removed problem residents. I made the hard choices you were too weak to make. The room went still as stone," her words hanging like smoke over dry timber. And then Agent Bennett stood, her badge glinting. "Mrs. Peaton, you are not required to speak, but anything you say can and will be used against you in federal court cameras." Flashed neighbors gasped. Someone began recording on their phone within seconds. The entire meeting was captured from every angle, and Constance realized too late she had confessed to everything in front of 50 witnesses. Her arrogance did not stop. She pointed a shaking finger at me, shouting, "Garrett Blackwood manufactured this entire scandal. He cannot accept standards I have protected, property values maintained, aesthetics, ensured compliance." The crowd erupted, Johnson shouting, "You stole our money." Henderson calling out, "You forced families to sell Martinez." His deputy voice cutting clear, "You lived on stolen land." Accusations flew one after another like stones breaking windows, the air thick with years of suppressed rage finally bursting free. Constance tried to shout, over it her composure shattering into jagged edges of desperation. "You people don't understand. Real leadership requires sacrifice. I admit to doing whatever was necessary, even when you couldn't appreciate it." Marcus seized the moment. "Are you admitting to financial fraud and property theft?" She spun toward him, face flushed. "I admit to doing whatever was required to maintain community standards. That was it. The slip, the final nail." Agent Bennett closed her notebook. "Constance Peaton, you are under arrest for wire fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy, and bribery of a public official." The sound of handcuffs clicked through the silence like the closing of a cell door. Neighbors gasped. Some cheered. Cameras caught every second federal agents leading her away. Her face drained of color, her husband stumbling after her. I stood at the podium where she had once hammered her gavel to silence us. Now the community looked at me, faces filled not with fear but with hope. "Ladies and gentlemen, our community just reclaimed $850,000 in stolen property, and together we will build something beautiful." The applause began slow, then grew into a roar that rattled the windows. It was the sound of freedom in the weeks that followed. The legal victories came faster than any of us imagined. Constance pled guilty to 14 federal charges rather than face trial. Her husband resigned from counsel in disgrace. They left for Florida, shadows of who they had been. The federal judge awarded $1.4 million in damages, the largest HOA fraud judgment in state history. But money was not the real victory. On the land where her stolen mansion once stood We raised a community center named for my wife, Sarah. Children now laugh in the rooms where intimidation once lived. Families gather where lies once grew. My destroyed grove became the Millbrook Arboretum, each family planting a tree, with their name etched on a plaque, Sarah's Oak, standing at the center, a living heartbeat of love and resilience. And yet in those early days of freedom, even as we rebuilt, the weight of what had happened pressed on all of us neighbors, once divided by fences, now bound together by scars, and by a single truth: power abused unchecked can poison an entire community, but power shared through courage can heal it. 6 months later, I stood on the deck of what used to be her stolen lakefront mansion. The air smelled of fresh-cut grass and lake water, and the sound of my grandchildren laughing carried across the water. They ran barefoot in the sand, where her illegal dock once reached like a claw into stolen land. The federal court had not only given me $1.4 million in damages, it had given the community back its heart. The Sarah Blackwood Memorial Community Center rose where her mansion once stood, sunlight glowing on glass walls. Neighbors streamed in for art classes, for senior bridge tournaments, for summer barbecues, every nail and beam funded by the money she had stolen from us, now reclaimed by law and justice in the place where my memorial grove had been torn apart. We planted 40 new trees, one for every family in Millbrook Estates, brass plaques gleaming at their bases, each with words of resilience and hope. Sarah's Oak stood in the center, her name etched in gold memory, of love that grows stronger through storms. The change rippled outward. Our case became law school. Reading politicians cited it in debates. The state legislature passed new rules for HOAs requiring audits, background checks, transparency across Ohio. Other neighborhoods reclaimed millions in stolen land and fees. Our small fight had grown into a movement. But for me, the victory was not in the money or the headlines. It was in the quiet evenings when I walked the new arboretum, hearing the leaves rustle like Sarah's laughter again. It was in seeing neighbors who once barely waved now gathering for dinners under the open pavilion. It was in watching children chase fireflies on land that finally belonged to all of us. We built the Millbrook Property Rights Foundation with part of my settlement. Money-free legal help for families trapped under corrupt HOAs. We took calls from desperate voices, people fined for garden gnomes, for paint colors, for grass, an inch too tall. 17 families saved. $300,000 recovered each case. A spark of justice spreading wider. Our first tree festival came that summer. The air thick with the smell of grilled burgers and honeysuckle. Families spread blankets on the grass, music playing, laughter. Rolling across the lake where once fear had lived, Henderson, our new president, stood tall, delivering a speech about unity. Johnson presented transparent accounts. Neighbors clapped with pride for the first time in years. Even Deputy Martinez came, holding his wife's hand, his children chasing each other through the shade he had once helped destroy. But the moment that broke me came when a scholarship was announced for a high school girl named Emma Rodriguez. She wanted to study property law. Her essay about protecting communities earned her $5,000 towards school. Marcus offered her a summer internship with his firm. Her smile lit the entire pavilion, the future looking brighter than any of us had dared dream as the sun set the lake-burned gold. Sarah's Oak, standing proud in the center of the grove. Children gathered at a fire pit, roasting marshmallows on the exact spot where Constance's Escalade once sat. Neighbors shared stories of the bad old days, their voices weaving a tapestry of survival and victory, and in that moment I understood something deep: power does not always roar. Sometimes it grows in silence, like roots weaving beneath soil. Sometimes the strongest act of resistance is simply standing your ground, refusing to bow, refusing to sell, refusing to let lies define your truth. I thought about Sarah. Her battle with cancer, her quiet strength, the way she smiled through storms. She had always said, trees prove that beauty can endure hardship, and now her words lived in every branch, every leaf, every shade falling across our community. The fight had cost me sleepless nights, tears and memories carved into wood, but it had given back something priceless. It had given us each other, neighbors once, divided by suspicion, now built bridges across fences once ruled by fear, now ruled by laughter. The association that had been a weapon was transformed into a home. And as I looked across the lake that night with fireflies blinking like stars rising, from the grass I knew we had won not just a legal battle, not just a judgment, but something bigger, the right to belong, the right to stand tall like trees weathering storms together. The story should have ended there, but life has a way of echoing. Long after the gavel falls, 6 months after the judgment, I began receiving letters from people far beyond our county, strangers from across the state, even from other parts of the country. They wrote about fines that bled them dry, about boards that acted like kings, about neighbors driven from their homes by rules that had nothing to do with safety or beauty, only with control and greed. Each letter carried the same question. How did you fight back? I read them at my kitchen table, the same place where I once sat with Sarah planning our retirement, coffee cooling beside me, as I held pages smudged with ink and tears, and I realized our fight was no longer just about Millbrook. It was about giving ordinary people a weapon to stand up to power, so I traveled. I spoke at town halls, law schools, homeowner meetings, sometimes to rooms of 10 people, sometimes to crowds of hundreds. I told them about the chainsaws that woke me. The morning my life changed, about the woman who thought she was untouchable, about the trees that became tombstones and then became the roots of a movement. And everywhere I went, heads nodded, fists clenched, eyes burned with the recognition of their own battles. Meanwhile, back in Millbrook, our new board worked like a family Henderson, presiding with humility. Johnson keeping accounts open and clean, every decision voted on openly, every dollar accounted for transparency that felt like sunlight. After years of shadow, neighbors volunteered for committees, not out of fear but out of pride. The Memorial Center thrived, hosting birthdays, weddings, even funerals, moments of life and death framed by the walls that once belonged to greed children. Learned to swim where Constance's illegal dock once stood. Seniors played cards under the same roof where she once schemed over stolen funds. Justice had not just punished her, it had built something alive. Yet there were nights I still dreamed of, sawdust and chainsaws. I woke sweating with the sound of steel ripping wood in my ears. Grief never vanishes. It simply changes shape sometimes. When the wind rustled through Sarah's new oak, I could almost hear her whisper telling me to keep going, that the fight was not finished. One evening, Marcus called with news 3 other communities had already used our case as precedent to reclaim stolen common land. Over $2 million recovered, homes restored, dignity returned. He laughed, saying, "Garrett, you have no idea how big this is going to get." And I felt something stir inside me. Not pride, not vengeance, something simpler. Hope. But Constance still lingered like a ghost, though she had pled guilty, though she had left for Florida whispers. Of her surfaced neighbors she had ruined years ago, wrote letters thanking us for exposing her, some told stories of how she had nearly broken them financially, emotionally, spiritually. Her shadow stretched long, and I knew there were more like her, hidden behind smiling faces and polished cars in subdivisions across the country, so I poured myself into the foundation. Our small office grew into a statewide network. Volunteers, attorneys, even students offering help. We took on cases of families facing foreclosure over bogus fines. We fought against boards that weaponized rules, against widows, against veterans, against anyone who dared stand tall, each victory small, but each one planting another root in soil that had once felt poisoned. And through it all, the community stood with me. Every festival, every gathering reminded me of why we fought together. The smell of food grilling by the lake, the sound of children splashing in water that belonged to everyone, the sight of neighbors clapping, as scholarships were handed to young people who dreamed of becoming the next Marcus or Janet or Lisa. Sometimes at night, I walked to the edge of the lake where her mansion had stood, the water lapping against the sand, reflecting the moon. I thought about how quickly power can crumble, how greed blinds people into thinking they are untouchable, and how the truth-like roots will always find a way to break through. Stone Sarah would have smiled to see it all the center. The arboretum, the families. Bound together, she had always believed beauty could grow from storms, and now her words had proven true. The fight was not just about reclaiming land or money. It was about reclaiming dignity, about reminding people that standing firm, even when it costs, you can change everything. And as I looked at the horizon where the sun bled into the lake, painting it crimson and gold, I knew the story was not finished. There was still more work to be done, more voices to answer, more battles to fight. But I also knew we had proven something no dictator, no fraud, no chainsaw could ever erase. A community united is stronger than fear. The final chapter of our story did not happen in a courtroom or under the bright lights of a news camera. It happened right here in Millbrook on a summer evening when the air smelled of honeysuckle and the laughter of children rolled across the water. The fight was long over, the lawsuit settled, the money recovered, the mansion gone. But the echoes of what we endured lived on in the way neighbors waved now, in the way fences became invitations instead of walls. The Sarah Blackwood community center glowed in the dusk lanterns strung across the patio, music spilling from open doors. Families carried casseroles and pies. Kids raced down the grass, their bare feet pounding where once the shadow of Constance's Escalade had loomed. The arboretum stood tall behind them, 40 trees each, a monument to resilience, plaques shining like stars. Sarah's oak in the center, her name etched into brass, a reminder that storms pass, but roots endure. I walked through the crowd, shaking hands, hearing stories. People who once barely nodded now embraced me. Henderson leaned close, whispering, "We were afraid for so long, and now look at us." Johnson showed me the ledger open for all to see. Every dollar accounted. Neighbors signed their names in approval, like signatures on a declaration of freedom. The fire pit crackled where her driveway once lay. Marshmallows hissed over the flames. Children smeared with chocolate laughed until they fell into the grass. It was the same spot where chainsaws once tore. Through my heart, the same spot where grief nearly broke me, now filled with joy and healing. And yet I still thought of Sarah. She would have loved this festival. She would have loved to see the way our tragedy bloomed into something no tyrant could crush. I felt her in the wind rustling through leaves. I felt her in the warmth of neighbors' arms. I felt her in the golden light sliding across the lake. That night I stood on the pavilion steps looking out at faces glowing in firelight. And I spoke. From the place where grief and hope met, ladies and gentlemen, I said, this is what happens when we stand together. This is what happens when we refuse to bow to fear, when we protect not just land, not just property, but dignity and truth. The applause rose like thunder rolling over the water. And I knew then that the story was bigger than Millbrook, bigger than me, bigger than any single battle. It was about ordinary people learning that they had more power than they were ever told. The foundation grew stronger in the years that followed. We helped families from coast to coast. Some saved homes, some reclaimed stolen land, some simply found the courage to face down bullies who thought they were untouchable. Every case, another seed planted, every victory, another tree rising in soil once thought barren. And each time I spoke at a gathering or answered a desperate call, I remembered the morning the chainsaws woke me. I remembered stepping onto the porch in my pajamas, watching my past fall in sawdust, and I remembered the fire that started, then a fire that would never go out, because the truth is, this was never only about trees. It was about legacy, about community, about the power of refusing to be silent. It was about how even when everything is cut down, roots still live beneath the soil, waiting for a chance to grow again, stronger than before. So now when the sun sets over our reclaimed lake and paints the water crimson and gold, I sit on the deck surrounded by laughter, and I smile. Sarah was right all along. Storms do not destroy. They reveal what is strong enough to endure. And if you are listening to this, wondering if your fight is hopeless, wondering if your enemy is too powerful, wondering if standing alone can make a difference. Remember this story. Remember that a retired engineer with nothing but stubbornness and love for his wife turned 6 stumps into a movement that changed laws. Remember that the loudest roar of power is nothing compared to the quiet strength of truth. So I ask you, what will you do when the chainsaws come for your trees? Will you bow? Will you sell? Will you stay silent? Or will you stand? Will you fight? Will you discover that you are stronger than they ever wanted you to believe? Drop a comment, share your story, let others know they are not alone, and remember, courage is contagious. 1 voice becomes 2, 2 become 10. And before long, a whole community rises like a forest unbreakable. This is Millbrook. This is Sarah's legacy, and this is proof that even when the storm takes everything, you can still grow something beautiful. You've heard this confession. Now wait until you hear the next one.